Thom Hartmann here with you. We have stepped through the looking glass. The man who in 1986 the United States Senate said was such a racist that he could not have a federal judgeship was just nominated by Donald Trump to be the guy who enforces our anti-discrimination laws. Jeff Beauregard Sessions as Attorney General. Things are getting really strange. Let's check in with one of the more clear-eyed analysts of the American political scene, Congressman Alan Grayson, representing the 9th District of Florida, grayson.house.gov. You can tweet him at Alan, A-L-A-N, Grayson, G-R-E-Y-S-O-N. Congressman, welcome back to the program.
Thank you, Tom.
Thanks for joining us. We have, I don't want to say rebranded because we haven't gone that far, but I am kind of redefining my program right now as Resistance Central, and have my own opinions about exactly how the Democrats should deal with this and how Americans should deal with this. But without contaminating your thoughts, I would love to hear them about these issues. Where do you think we're at? Where do you think we're going?
We're going to have a long, hard 4 years. There's no question about that. We went through this with George W. Bush, and at the end of that period of time, I convinced myself that he was the worst president of my lifetime. He's been worse than Richard Nixon. He not only got us into endless wars, but he also destroyed the economy. I think this one might turn out to be worse. I see no evidence that Donald Trump is going to do anything but lead this country to disaster. Remember what happened last time we had a businessman in the White House? That was Herbert Hoover.
Yeah. Well, George W. Bush was a businessman, too. He owned 3 failed oil companies, as I recall.
Yes, but at least he'd had the experience of being a governor.
Yeah, that's true.
You have to go all the way back to Hoover to find somebody who wasn't a governor, a senator, or a vice president, or a general before becoming president of the United States. Right.
And it wouldn't surprise me if when they're writing the history of this era, that, there's a Great Depression that leads to a war that you can lay at the footsteps of Donald Trump, just like you can Herbert Hoover. But that's anyway.
People don't realize how easy it is to get into war. Think about what happened when we decided to knock off the dictator of Panama because he was taunting our president. That could have easily been a bogged-down war in the same way that Iraq and Afghanistan became a bogged-down war.
Well, if World War I started because Archduke Ferdinand got assassinated. I mean, it doesn't take much.
No.
And that's the mind-boggling thing. You've been out talking about the None of the Above Act. There's interesting numbers coming out of the Electoral College. It looks like Hillary Clinton will have won the popular vote by about 2 million when all the votes are counted. It certainly is heading in that direction. It's well over 1.2 million right now. Last night on MSNBC, which is generally a reasonably good source. I mean, they're not allowed to cover things that I think are important, like net neutrality, of course, because Comcast owns them. But they did. So one of the commentators pointed out, I think it was Chris Matthews, that in every one of the districts, the congressional districts that Hillary Clinton lost in, that had she won, she would be president right now. Gary Johnson got more votes than she lost by. In other words, if Gary Johnson had not been in the race, she would be our president right now, or if people hadn't voted for him, let me put it that way. And I'm not quite sure yet what to make of that. I'm still cogitating on that. But the NOTA Act, tell us about this and why you think this might be useful or even a solution to some of our problems, as opposed to something like ranked choice voting. Obviously, we're not going to get proportional representation anytime soon. But
all right. Well, first, to give you some background, 2 days before the election, I did a nationwide poll that I paid for myself. And what I wanted to do is get a sense of what it meant that we were locked into these 2 candidates and the kind of misery that we've all been feeling during the course of the campaign. Whether you're a Hillary supporter or not a Hillary supporter, even if you're a Trump supporter, I think most people have been feeling enormous anxiety all year long. And when you think about it, it's bizarre. I mean, democracy means we pick our own leaders. And you would think that that would be a festive occasion, as it was in ancient Athens. And instead, it's become this just gut-wrenching experience that we go through at great length every 4 years. It's essentially become a national nervous breakdown. And I wanted to try to see what the cause of that might be. So I did a poll, and one thing I did in the poll was I did some fantasy politics. I picked different presidential matchups. I'll give you some numbers, okay? Mm-hmm. We know what the numbers are for Hillary Clinton versus Trump. Here's Obama versus Trump, 51-49, Obama versus Trump. Bill Clinton versus Trump, 52-48. Joe Biden versus Trump, 54-46. Now it's getting kind of interesting, isn't it? Mm-hmm. Bernie Sanders versus Trump, 56-44. That's a double-digit win for Bernie Sanders.
Now I'd put that at the feet of policy. I wonder to what extent you could put some of the former ones at the feet of sexism.
Well, I'll tell you, I saw exactly the same thing on the other side. Mm-hmm. You know, when you match up Hillary against other Republican candidates, you see that only Trump really made it close. Hillary Clinton against Ted Cruz, Cruz 52, Clinton 48. George W. Bush versus Hillary Clinton, George W. Bush 54, Hillary Clinton 46. Marco Rubio versus Hillary Clinton, Rubio 55, Hillary Clinton 45. Mitt Romney versus Clinton, 56-44. Paul Ryan versus Clinton, Ryan 57, Clinton 43.
Now these are polls of the general electorate, not partisans.
That's correct. The general electorate. That is right. Correct. So what you realize is that both parties blundered into choosing the least popular plausible candidate in the entire nation to run against each other. You know, people were joking beforehand. They were each so lucky because each one had the one opponent they might be able to beat, and the polling actually confirmed that. And that got me thinking how odd this is that we've come to this point, and how is it that we've come to a point where the primary system generates candidates who are not even close to being the optimal candidates. We're a country of almost 330 million people, and we end up with two candidates that were very widely disliked. Yeah. So I asked nationally, what did you think of the presidential primary system? Most people said that they were disappointed. And this included 38% of Democrats, not a majority of Democrats, but a very substantial number of Democrats. 53% of Republicans said that they were disappointed by the presidential primary process. And interestingly, 69% of independents. So the great majority of independents said that they were disappointed by the primary process. And then I realized, looking back on it, that although we had almost 50 million people, well, around 50 million people participate in the primary process, we had 200 million adults who didn't. So I thought that was very instructive. You know, when you have a system where the primaries determine the candidates, and you have only 1/5 of the adult population participating in that process, this is the kind of thing that you end up with. So the question is, what is a good hack for this? What do you do to tweak the system in order to be able to make it productive again? Mm-hmm. And what do you do to empower those people who chose not to participate in the primaries or otherwise were not happy with the choices that they were left with on the general election ballot? And it turns out that none of the above is effective to do that. I asked in the poll, if you had the choice to reject all candidates on the ballot, all four of them, not just the two major ones, but all four of them, would you have done that? Would you have rejected them? 40% of the population said yes. I would have rejected all the candidates I wanted to do over.
40% of the American electorate said no to both Trump, Clinton, and Stein and Johnson?
That's right. And in fact, the Johnson vote in particular was overwhelmingly consistent of people who would have voted none of the above if it had been on the ballot.
Yeah, I would argue that the Johnson vote was essentially
a none of the above vote.
Yeah, I'd argue that the Johnson vote essentially was a none of the above vote. But anyway, except for the hardcore libertarians.
In the crosstabs. So if none of the above had been on the ballot, it would have been 40% for none of the above. And then within the remaining 60%, it would have been Clinton 30, Trump 27, because more Trump voters would have voted for none of the above than Clinton voters. Mm-hmm. Johnson 2 and Stein 1. So none of the above would have won. And you think about the sort of the deep meaning of that, the fact that we went through a year and a half long or 2 year long system of primaries, general elections, so on, and the end result is to throw up 4 candidates that would have all lost to none of the above. And you realize how desperate we need that alternative. How desperately we need that alternative.
So if none of the above is on the ballot, and none of the above gets more votes than either of the 2 candidates, what do you do? Do you give the position to, in this case, it would have been Hillary Clinton, who outpolled Donald Trump, 30 to 26, as I recall you said?
Well, I wouldn't do that. That's actually the way they do it in Nevada now, which is the one state where none of the above's on the ballot. They basically give it to the runner-up. I think that's a mistake. I think that's cheating the voters. I think that people want and need the right to an effective none of the above ballot. So I would say that when none of the above wins, you have to do it over. And you have to do it over in a very short timeline because the Constitution says, the 20th Amendment says, Congress has to be sworn in on January 3rd, and the president has to be sworn in on January 20th.
Right.
So you have a blessedly short do-over, and then you have a better choice.
So we'd have an election campaign and selection process / period of time that would be all that not dissimilar from a typical European election.
Or a special election. I mean, we do that all the time when we want to or need to after somebody passed away. We have snap special elections all around the country. It's obvious that if this happened, if none of the above won on November 8th, you could get it all redone before Christmas.
Right. So your legislation provides for this. You've written this legislation up and presented it to your colleagues in the House of Representatives?
I wrote it up. I gave a speech about it the night before last, and I introduced the bill. It's a Grayson special. It's 5 pages or less. All my bills are short and to the point. I'm not trying to write War and Peace. And it just basically codified what I just suggested, that none of the above has to be on every federal ballot. We'll leave the states to their own designs in that regard.
Right.
But every congressman, every senator, every presidential candidate not only has to run against their nominal party opponents, but also has to run against the principle of none of the above. And that's a very important principle, because I think that you would see an end to negative advertising if none of the above was on the ballot. We're drenched with it. 4 years ago, every single penny that the national party spent in House races was negative advertising. It's eased off a little bit since then, but not very much.
Yeah.
And if everything's negative, all you're doing is pushing up the vote for none of the above. So we'd see a complete flip. Instead of listening to how terrible the other fellow is, instead we'd get to listen to what you're going to do for people. The entire political discourse now revolves around what these elected officials are going to do to us, rather than what they're going to do for us.
Right.
And that's pitiful. That's just pitiful. So I think that you'd have dramatically different discourse. I think you'd also have much higher turnout. I think a lot of people who didn't vote because they wanted to vote for none of the above, and choice wasn't there.
Yeah, and in fact, there was a large non-turnout in this election compared to the last 2 presidential elections. And I wouldn't disagree that those were people who were just like, which is equivalent to none of the above. So do you have any colleagues who are on? We just have a few seconds before we're going to hit the break here. Is this going to go anywhere?
Well, I just introduced it. I want to point out that about 15 years ago, a Republican member of Congress introduced this bill, and there are Republicans who have come out in favor of it. On our side, Ralph Nader has been championing this cause for many, many years.
Yeah.
And it seems like something that we not only need and want, but something that people deserve.
So people can call their member of Congress at 202-225-3121 and say, support Alan Grayson's None of the Above bill. Congressman Grayson, hang on just a second. I'm going to get stepped on here.
This is the Thom Hartmann Program.
Congressman Alan Grayson, thanks so much for being with us today, sir.
It's a pleasure, Tom. Thank you.
Great talking with you, as always.